每當氣溫急降嘅時候，寒冬會奪走多條生命，當中有唔少受害者。
If you're not familiar with the iceberg meme, it's basically just a fun way to categorize a topic starting from the well-known and mainstream ideas at the top and then going progressively deeper into unusual and obscure ideas. And the great fun of these iceberg memes is seeing how weird it gets as you go down. So I thought I would create a music theory iceberg, and today we're going to start above ground at the tip of the iceberg and work our way down into the murky weirdness below. So starting at the very top, we've got A equals 440 Hertz. This is what's called concert pitch, a standard universalized pitch that we tune A above middle C to allow all instruments to be in tune with each other without having to coordinate which note to tune to. Pretty much every piece of music you've ever listened to, particularly popular music, will be tuned to 440 Hertz. We've also got some time signatures here, most prominently 4/4. As I'm sure you're aware, the vast majority of popular music is in the time signature of 4/4. But we do get some other time signatures sometimes, and the two most common ones beyond 4/4 would be 3/4 and 6/8. Over here, we've got 12-tone equal temperament. Pretty much every piece of music you've ever listened to will be in 12-tone equal temperament. Without going into too much depth, it's the way that we define how each note should be in tune with each other. All we have to do to tune something in 12-tone equal temperament is to tune all of the octaves first, and then divide those octaves into 12 equally spaced pitches. Over here, we've got our three standard accidentals, natural, sharp, and flat. We've got the pentatonic scale, perhaps the most fundamental and straightforward scale in all of music. We've got our two most common clefs, the treble clef and the bass clef. Major and minor, which of course are the two overarching types of tonality in Western music. And they've also snuck in power chords here, which are chords that don't have a major or minor because they don't have a third. They're just a root and a fifth. Right, level 2. So we still haven't gone below the surface yet, but this is the tip of the iceberg with music theory. At the top here, we've got harmonic minor. So harmonic minor is a variation on the typical minor scale, on the natural minor scale, where we make one modification, we raise the 7th note. And this makes the scale more appropriate for writing harmony in the minor key. We've got a few more chord types here, chord types beyond major and minor. We've got diminished, augmented, 7th chords, inversions, and suspended chords. And although these chord types are certainly less common than major and minor, these will still turn up in a wide breadth of music in all styles. Over here we've got the blues scale, which is exactly the same as the minor pentatonic scale, but with one additional note that we could call the blue note the flat fifth. Now, quite an important concept in this tier is circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is sort of a universal tool that ties together various concepts in Western music. On the most basic level, it's a way of working out which sharps and flats are in each key, or in a more advanced usage, you could use the circle of fifths to conceptualize how different key changes might feel brighter or darker. Sequence is a very fundamental element of melody writing. It's basically when you take a phrase, "Lights go out and I can be saved," and then you immediately repeat that phrase, but now at a either higher or lower pitch. Tides that I tried to swim against. And the last thing we've got on this tier is cadences. A cadence is basically just a short chord progression, a short chord movement that resolves a passage. The two main types of cadence that you'll hear used time and time again are the perfect cadence, also known as the authentic cadence, which is 5/1, or the plagal cadence, sometimes referred to as the Amen cadence, that resolves from 4/1. And now we enter the water. And starting us off, we've got this selection of odd time signatures. As the name would suggest, these time signatures are odd, they're unusual. But because of that, they have a really intriguing quality, a really unusual sound to the Western listener. Diatonic modes is what you'll think of as just modes. Mixolydian, Dorian, Lydian, all of those common modes you hear about. A mode is when you take the notes of a scale, but then you treat a different note as the root point, as the starting point. So for example, G Mixolydian is C major, but treating G as the root note. They're called diatonic modes here because they're referring to the modes of the major scale. Modal interchange is obviously related to modes, is when in a piece of music you might switch between using different parallel modes. So one part of the music might be in E Mixolydian, and another might be in E Dorian. Here we've got some different accidental marks. We've got double accidentals. This is a double flat, and this is a double sharp. For example, A double flat would be the note G natural, because we've flattened A twice. And the note A double sharp would be the note B, because we've sharpened A twice. There's various instances where you might need to use a double sharp or double flat when writing something down on sheet music. Down here we have the whole tone scale. This is a very easy scale to remember because it's literally just whole tones going up. Now we mentioned these odd time signatures, or what we might call odd meters, but here we have mixed meter. Mixed meter is when a piece of music switches between different time signatures regularly, mixing different meters together. For example, Good Morning by the Beatles keeps switching time signatures, resulting in what you would call a mixed meter.
Nothing to do to save his life, call his wife in.
Now earlier we had the harmonic minor, here we've got the melodic minor. The melodic minor is another variation on the minor scale. This is the natural minor scale. The harmonic minor scale raises the 7th degree, and the melodic minor then raises the 6th degree as well, effectively to bridge the gap that was created when we raised the 7th degree. Upper chord extensions is basically any time you have a 9th, 11th or 13th in a chord, and it could be a flat 9 or a sharp 9, or it could even be an add 9 or an add 11, that sort of thing. Anytime you have a chord like that, it's referred to as a upper chord extension. And this funny symbol here is another type of clef. We already had the treble clef and the bass clef. This is what would usually be called the alto clef, and is nowadays only really used for the viola. Now, although normally when you see this symbol it will be an alto clef, this symbol in its most basic form is what we actually call a C clef. The symbol is a stylized C, and it works that whatever line you put the C on is the C line. So in a standard alto clef, we put it so the middle line is passing through the middle of the C, so the middle line is C. This is actually the case with all clefs. A treble clef is what's called a G clef. So although we almost always place it on the second line up like this, making this line the G line, we could place it on a different line, changing where the note G is. And same for the bass clef. This is the F clef. The idea is whatever line passes through these two dots is F. In basic terms, a Neapolitan chord is a major chord built on the flat 2nd degree of the scale. However, it comes with some context as well. A true Neapolitan chord will be voiced like this in the first inversion, and will resolve onto the 5th chord of the key. And in Roman numeral analysis, we can even label the Neapolitan chord with its own unique symbol, a capital N. The augmented 6th is a similar type of chord where you have to use it in a particular context. In basic terms, it's a dominant 7th chord built on the 6th degree of the minor scale. So, for example, in the key of A minor, it would be an F7 chord. But the way we use an augmented 6th chord is that our F7 here needs to now move to the 5th chord of the key, in this instance E major. And the voice leading has to be done in a particular way. The F at the bottom of the chord needs to resolve down onto E, and the E flat at the top of the F7 chord needs to resolve up onto E. And this is why it's called an augmented 6th chord. Because here we've got E flat resolving onto E, we actually instead label this as a D sharp, because this not only shows the player that this note is a leading note resolving up onto the E, but it also avoids a bit of an awkward accidental. And because we've labelled this E flat note as a D sharp, it's changed the interval of the chord from a dominant seventh, a minor seventh, into an augmented sixth, F to D sharp. And the last thing to remember with augmented sixth chords is there's actually 3 different types of voicing for them, each named after a different nationality. Another type of chord, this time from rock music rather than classical music, is the Hendrix chord. The Hendrix chord is just another name for a sharp 9 chord, a 7 chord with a sharp 9 added on top. So for example, we could have E7 sharp 9. This is our Hendrix chord. As the name suggests, Hendrix was quite a fan of this chord. For example, we can see it here in Purple Haze. And what makes it so distinctive is that we simultaneously have the major third here, the G sharp, and we also have the minor third here, the G natural, although the most accurate way to notate this would be with an F double sharp. Now, of course, this chord got its name by being used significantly by Jimi Hendrix, but we can also see it in other songs, like here in Michelle. A Picardy third is when a passage of music in the minor key resolves onto the major chord. For example, this passage of music is in the key of B minor, but resolves with a B major chord, giving it a grand and complete ending.
We hope that you choke, that you choke.
An altered chord is an idea from jazz where the dominant chord of the key, the 5th chord of the key, has its 5th either flattened or sharpened, and or could have its 9th flattened or sharpened. I say and or because if a chord chart says G alt, for example, it's not specifying a particular type of altered chord. It's just telling the player that they need to play a G dominant 7 chord, but with some alteration made to the 5th and or the 9th. The alterations made to the dominant chord will add extra tension to the chord, meaning it will have a sweeter resolution when it reaches back to the tonic chord. Polyrhythm is when we have more than one consistent pulse playing at the same time. So, for example, a very common polyrhythm is 3 against 2. 2 consistent pulses in the same time as 3 consistent pulses.
OK.
A tritone substitution is an idea from jazz music where we substitute a dominant chord with the dominant chord a tritone away from it. This is most commonly done with the 5th chord of the key. So, for example, in the key of C major, we would be substituting our G7 chord for a D flat 7 chord. And what allows this to work is that both those chords, G7 and D flat 7, both contain the same tritone. So they both have the same effective resolution back to the tonic chord. Quartal harmony is harmony built from stacks of fourths. So most of the harmony we deal with is what we would call tertiary harmony, harmony built from thirds. All our common chord types, major, minor, diminished, 7th, 9th, anything like that, is built by stacking thirds up. But alternatively, we could make chords by stacking different intervals, like fourths. For example, in Tarkus by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, these arpeggiated chords played on the organ are all built by stacking fourths up. And as you can see from the chord labels, because our chord labeling system is built around tertiary harmony, when we're dealing with quartal harmony, the names can get a little bit odd. You'll see a lot of sus4, for example. And the last thing we've got in this tier is minor scale modes. So earlier we mentioned diatonic modes. These are modes of the major scale, where we've taken the major scale, but we've started on a different degree, resulting in a new scale, like Mixolydian, Dorian, etc. Minor scale modes are when we make modes from a minor scale. So for example, we might take the melodic minor scale, and by starting on a different scale degree, we generate a new alternative scale. For example, the 4th mode of the melodic minor scale is what we would call Lydian dominant. And this is the scale used in the Simpsons theme song. Right, we're really getting into the depths of this ocean now. Metric modulation. Metric modulation is when we switch from one time signature to another, but the two are connected by a consistent mathematic relationship. For example, we could switch from 6/8 to 4/4. We could make the two sort of connect together by making the eighth note worth the same amount in 6/8 as it is in 4/4. So the two different meters sort of get married by this consistent note value. A polymeter is when we have effectively two different time signatures playing at the same time. What this means is that one part will effectively go out of time with the other until a full rotation has happened when they fall back into sync together. For example, the song 5/4 by Gorillaz has a guitar riff in 5/4, but a drum pattern in 4/4. So after the first bar, the two go out of sync until they've rotated enough that they're back together again. An octatonic scale is technically any scale with 8 notes, but most commonly it's referring to one of two symmetrical scales. One that goes semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, and the other does the opposite, going tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone. This second octatonic scale here that goes tone, semitone is also referred to as a diminished scale and is what we hear at the beginning of the song Just by Radiohead. The double harmonic scales are two scales that are often referred to with a variety of different names. The double harmonic major, sometimes just referred to as the double harmonic scale, is just like the major scale but with a flattened second degree and a flattened sixth degree. And the double harmonic minor scale, sometimes referred to as the Hungarian minor scale, is exactly the same as our usual harmonic minor scale but with the fourth degree raised. The double harmonic minor is also actually the fourth mode of the double harmonic major. A mu chord is just a particular name for what you might think of as a add two chord, a major chord with the second degree added in as well. The name mu chord was popularized by the band Steely Dan, who were particularly fond of this chord type. Polytonality is when we have more than one key playing at the same time. A composer well known for his use of polytonality is Charles Ives. For example, in this piece, the two upper voices of the choir are in the key of C major, and the two lower voices are in the key of B flat major. Bebop scales are variations on typical scales where an extra note has been added in. For example, the bebop dominant scale is just like the Mixolydian scale, but also features the unaltered seventh degree, so we've got the flat seventh and the natural seventh in the scale. Or you could have bebop Dorian, which is just like regular Dorian, but also includes the major third. These are the sort of scales that were used by bebop musicians like Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, and John Coltrane. However, it's important to remember that the idea of the bebop scales wasn't theorized until years after the bebop era. It was more of a retrospective way of analyzing how these players performed. Put simply, the Tristan chord is a half-diminished chord, and it gets its name from being the opening chord of Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde. So this is a chord we could label F minor 7 flat 5, but that's kind of missing the point of the Tristan chord. The importance of the Tristan chord is the fact that it's opening an opera with tonal ambiguity. Typically, an opera would open with a very clear statement of key, a clear statement of where we are tonally. But when Wagner opened his opera with this chord, it changed that, and many have argued that the use of this Tristan chord was the beginnings of atonality in Western music. Which leads me on nicely to the last thing in this tier, which is atonality. Atonality is quite simply when a piece of music avoids having any sense of tonal center, any sense of key. A atonal piece of music effectively has no key. This piece by Arnold Schoenberg very much avoids having any sense of key or resolution. Alright, we're approaching the bottom of this iceberg, the second to last tier, and we start off with swing ratios. Swing as a rhythm is effectively when two eighth notes have unequal rhythms to each other, where one eighth note is longer than the other eighth note, and a swing ratio is a way of describing how much that difference is. So, for example, a 1-to-1 relationship would be not swing, it would be straight, because both eighth notes have equal duration. However, a 2-to-1 swing fill would be triplet fill, because the first note has double the duration of the second. 3-to-1 ratio would be a dotted eighth note swing like this. The first note has 3 times as much duration as the latter. A 3-to-2 ratio would be a type of quintuplet swing like this. Or we could have a 4-to-1 relationship like this, which is also a type of quintuplet swing. Of course, it's very important to remember that swing players aren't thinking in terms of swing ratios when they play. They're just letting it naturally swing, and the ratio to which they're swinging might even change throughout the performance. But swing ratios can be very useful when you're trying to program swing into a DAW. Overtones. So pretty much any time you play a note, for example on a piano, you're not just hearing that note. If I play an A on the piano, we are hearing what's called the fundamental pitch of A, but we're also hearing a series of overtones above that, quieter sympathetic notes, which effectively colour the tone of the note. And they always follow the exact same pattern of intervals in what's called the overtone series, or the harmonic series. The intervals start off by being very fundamental recognisable intervals, like octave, perfect fifth, perfect fourth, major third, minor third. Then, as we get into the quieter and much harder to hear harmonics, they venture into intervals that we wouldn't find in our standard tuning system, like a sub-minor third, a super major second, and so on. And the amazing thing is, even though all of these are technically separate frequencies, separate pitches, our ear perceives them all as one cohesive note. 24 tet. So right at the beginning, we talked about 12-tone equal temperament, where our instruments are tuned by tuning the octave and then dividing the space between those octaves into 12 equally spaced pitches. Well, 24 tet is 24-tone equal temperament. Tet is just short for tone equal temperament. So 24 tet is a way of creating what you might call microtonal music, by giving us an extra microtonal note between every standard pitch on our piano. For example, here's a piece of music by Ivan Wiszengradsky, which is written in 24-tone equal temperament. And off to the right of our 24 tet here, we have some microtonal accidentals, which we could use to notate our 24 tet music. We have a half sharp, so we could have, for example, an A half sharp, which is a note pitched between the notes A and B flat. We could have a half flat, so a half flat would be a note pitched between A and A flat. And we could even have something like this, which is a sharp and a half. A equals 415 hertz. So right at the beginning, we were looking at A equals 440 hertz, which is what we call concert pitch, the standard pitch that we tune A above middle C to. The standard of A440 was only brought in around 100 years ago, and before that, historically, a wide range of different tunings were used across different geographic areas. 415 is what we call Baroque tuning, and is almost exactly one semitone lower than modern concert pitch. Baroque tuning is used when a performer wants to try and recreate the original sound of the composition closer to the original tuning it would have been written in. However, it's important to remember that 415 wasn't a historic standard, it was just one of many different tunings a Baroque instrument may have been tuned to. Just intervals. If an interval is just, it means it's been tuned to a perfect simple ratio. So for example, a justly tuned perfect fifth would be the ratio of 3 to 2. If you tune an instrument to just intervals, it's what we call just intonation or pure intonation. And although theoretically it's the purest way of tuning intervals, it presents a big problem. On any instrument with fixed tuning, like a keyboard instrument for example, you can't have pure intervals between every key without compromising other intervals. For example, if we tune our keyboard here in pure intonation in the key of A, so for example we have A and E as a 3 to 2 pure perfect fifth, unfortunately that means that by doing that, some of the other perfect fifths in the key are not 3 to 2 relationships and are actually very dissonant. So although 3 to 2 is the perfect and purest way to tune a perfect fifth interval, for keyboard instruments and similarly fixed tuned instruments, we have to have some way of adjusting or tempering this tuning system. As we discussed earlier, almost all modern music fixes this problem by using 12-tone equal temperament, where rather than worrying about the particular ratios between each interval, we just tune the octaves to perfect intervals and then divide the space between them logarithmically into 12 equally spaced pitches. And although of course this means that none of these intervals are now pure apart from the octave, they're close enough that our ear doesn't really mind. But 12-tone equal temperament isn't the only way of fixing this problem. Historically, other temperament systems were used. For example, mean tone temperament. Mean tone temperament, for example, is a system that was used historically to try and maintain justly tuned thirds, and it did this by slightly compromising the tuning of a fifth. Now, exactly how this was managed is a topic for another video. But what is interesting is in old temperament systems like mean tone temperament, because each instance of each interval was actually tuned subtly differently, it meant that different key centers actually had different characters. Some key centers were more in tune than others. So unlike in our modern system of 12-tone equal temperament where every key sounds exactly the same, different keys could actually have different qualities.
In D minor, which I always find is really the saddest of all keys, really. I don't know why, but it makes people weep instantly to play a